Kingdoms rise and fall. There is still one King reigning over all. So I will not fear, for this truth remains, that my God is the Ancient of Days.
in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. And you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you, I worship you. You are here and you're healing every heart. I worship you, yeah, I worship you. And you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. And you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. And that is who you are. Yeah, that is who you are. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop. Jesus, you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. I know you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. And that is who you are. That is who you are. Jesus, that is who you
My lips shall praise you, my great Redeemer. My heart will worship, Almighty Savior. My lips shall praise you, my great Redeemer. My heart will worship, Almighty Savior. You take all my guilt away, turn the darkest night to brightest day. You are the restorer of my soul. My lips shall praise you, my great Redeemer. My heart will worship, Almighty Savior. Love that conquers every fear. In the midst of trouble, you draw near. You are the restorer of my soul. My lips shall praise you, my great Redeemer. My heart will worship, Almighty Savior. You're the source of happiness, bringing peace when I am in distress. You are the restorer of my soul. are the restorer of my soul. You are the restorer of my soul. You are the restorer of my soul. My lips shall praise you. My lips shall praise you. My great Redeemer. My heart will worship. Almighty Savior. My lips shall praise you. My great Redeemer. My heart will worship. Almighty Savior. Almighty Savior, Almighty Savior, Almighty Savior. Yes, let's bless the Lord.
Matthew chapter 16. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life.
Jordan Peterson is a psychologist who's long been fascinated by the impact of the Bible on the modern world. He was in conversation with another YouTuber called Jonathan Peugeot when he said, "I've got the choice of believing two impossible things. I can either believe that the world is constituted so that God took on flesh and was crucified and rose 3 days later, or I can believe that human beings invented this unbelievably preposterous story that has stretched into every atom of culture. And it isn't obvious to me that the second hypothesis is any easier to believe than the first. Because the more you investigate the manifestations of the story of Christ, the more insanely complicated and far-reaching it becomes." Do you see what Peterson is saying? He's saying, okay, the Christian story is preposterous. God takes flesh, dies for the world, and is raised up again. Okay, that's a nuts story, and we've seen why that's a nuts story. But if you don't think that happened, what you instead have to think is that people invented that most preposterous story, and having invented that most preposterous story, it has worked itself on the human heart and worked itself into human societies such that it has transformed the world beyond all imagination. The world has been made by that man on the cross, right? The moral world, your moral sensibilities, the moral sensibilities of all of us in the modern times, the modern sensibilities that say we should live by equality, compassion, consent, enlightenment, science, freedom, and progress, The modern world has been made by that man on a cross. Now, why? What is the power in that man on a cross to make the world? Well, Christians come along and we just say, well, maybe it's because he's our maker. Maybe he has made the world in the moral sense because he is our maker. And at that stage, you're like, well, then I've got to believe in this improbable story of God taking flesh and dying on a cross and rising again. Yes, you do have to believe in that miracle. But if you reject that miracle, you have to embrace another kind of improbability. That somehow this very improbable story was invented by humans and that it had such a profound effect on human hearts and on human cultures. And in my final chapter of The Air We Breathe, I talk about the progress of Christianity from the most improbable beginnings to world domination. And I ask the question, how do you go from God-forsaken crucifixion to world domination? That's quite a miracle. But it's a miracle that has actually happened. You know, it's the ultimate water into wine miracle. I don't know if you believe in the water into wine miracle, but that was the first miracle in John's Gospel. Jesus turns water into wine. Now, you might not think that happened, but you must believe in this other miracle. This other miracle is that the one who is executed in God-forsaken agony dominates the world, right? That is quite the water into wine story. And it has definitely happened. And you're living within the worlds that crucified man has made. What do you make of that? In the chapter, I talk about the improbability of these origins producing such a global effect. And I talk about the fact that it was predicted, okay? The Old Testament predicted that there would be one coming, right back in the Garden of Eden. It was predicted that just the offspring of a woman would crush the head of evil, even as he himself was struck. You know, you've got these foreshadowings of the virgin birth of Jesus, his death on the cross, and his victory over evil. And throughout the Old Testament, you get this idea of the Messiah coming, and the Messiah would suffer, and yet the Messiah would rise, and the Messiah would bring about a global kingdom. In Daniel chapter 2, you get this idea of a small stone that is cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands. And it crashes into, in Daniel chapter 2, a massive statue that represents all the great superpowers of the ancient world. And somehow, this tiny, ignominious stone kind of crashes into all the empires of this world. They all crumble to dust, but this stone grows to become a mountain that fills and has dominion over the whole earth. Incredible. From little things, big things grow. Daniel 7, Daniel 9, Isaiah 9. All these great prophecies of from little things, big things grow. And then Jesus comes onto planet Earth. He says, yes, I am that one. And he says that his kingdom will grow like yeast working its way through a batch of dough. Or he says, he's like the mustard seed that's the smallest seed in the garden. And what happens? That goes down into the ground and dies. It rises up and it grows into the biggest tree that enfolds everything else. Jesus is making that prediction when he's just a matter of months away from God-forsaken execution. How do you go from God-forsaken execution to world domination? It is a miracle. It's a very improbable miracle. It is a predicted miracle. And it is the miracle that we are living within. What do you make of Jesus? What do you make of the Jesus revolution? And which miracle are you going to choose?
So, which miracle do we believe in? The story of God made flesh, dying for us and rising again? Or do we believe that it's all made up? If we believe the second one, we still have to recognise that the effect of the story of the crucified and risen Jesus has affected and shaped our culture and history over 2,000 years, creating our moral world today. Because that has actually happened historically. But we also have to recognise too that the story of our crucified God was predicted, that through the pages of the Old Testament there are promises and predictions of a messianic figure, God himself, who would pay the price for the disobedience of the Garden of Eden and set the world free from sin's dominion. Even Jesus tells his disciples on numerous occasions about how he would be handed over and crucified, but rise again on the third day. Did the writers of the Gospels simply copy those ancient ideas to create a story? Surely that's even more unlikely. If you saw them after the crucifixion, they were the least likely to be making up a story like that, because the resurrection hadn't happened yet. They were scared, broken, demoralized, walking away or in hiding. For them, the story of Jesus was over with the cross and a cold, dark tomb. It's the resurrection that exploded the story into the world, like a big bang expanding across the globe and transforming cultures with the possibility of forgiveness and freedom and all those other values we've been exploring, and so much more. It's the resurrection that means our sin is dealt with. It's the resurrection that reveals the promise of new and eternal life now. It's the resurrection that completes the story, the victory of the victim. It's the resurrection that opens the possibility of a restored relationship with God. Because of Jesus, we have hope and grace and a future. And how do we know that? Because historically, we've seen it happening, taking shape in lives and cultures and nations over 2 millennia. But you might say, resurrection doesn't normally happen. It's not natural to our life experience. Except when Jesus brings the supernatural in and transforms lives with his values. Water into wine and gallons of it. We live in our modern culture where we have wine that's running out and no one to turn to. We're so blessed in the UK and yet have forgotten the one who provides that blessing. One songwriter wrote, "We're so used to darkness, we forget there ever was a light." When we look around our world, it's a different story. Where there's lack and hardship and suffering, faith often flourishes. Why is that? Is it because they see and identify with that miracle in reality of a crucified God who's risen and lives? And therefore there's life and hope and promise on the other side of suffering. Seeing reports from Yemen this week of a 7-year-old child who lost a leg in a Saudi rocket attack, wanting to be a doctor so that he can help others. In contrast, we have holidaymakers complaining vehemently when their holiday has been disrupted, with no thought of those locals whose houses and livelihoods have been destroyed. We are so blessed. How can we offer ourselves to be a blessing to others? So which miracle? Scientifically, we can see the effect all around us and trace it back to the Big Bang of that first Easter. Culturally, we can see where the values that we live by are founded, not as laws and guidelines, but embodied in a man who was foretold 1,000 years before. And in terms of faith, we can believe that it's all made up, but that doesn't make sense given the impact that this story has had. In which case, the miracle of Jesus' death and resurrection, however improbably in our own experience, must be true. His invitation is to discover that miracle and live it day by day, following where he leads as part of this ever-expanding universe of faith that's called God's kingdom.
All I once held dear, built my life upon. All this world reveres and wars to own. All I once thought gain, I have counted loss, spent and worthless. is now compared to this? Knowing you, Jesus, knowing you, there is no greater thing. You're my all, you're the best, you're my joy, my righteousness, and I love you, Lord. Yeah. Now my heart's desire is to know you more, to be found in you and known as yours, to possess by faith what I could not earn, all surpassing gift of righteousness. Knowing you, Jesus, knowing you, there is no greater thing. You're my all, you're the best, you're my joy, my righteousness, and I love you, Lord. Oh, to know the power of your risen life, and to know you in your suffering, to become like you in your death, my Lord, so with you to live and never die. Knowing you, Jesus, knowing you, there is no greater thing. You're my all, you're the best, you're my joy, my righteousness. You're my all, you're the best, you're my joy, my righteousness. You're my all, you're the best, you're my joy, my righteousness, and I love you, Lord. You're my all, you're the best, you're my joy, my righteousness, and I love you, Lord.